All right, I am live. Look at this. This camera is way too close. Let's back it up just a little bit. Scoot back in the chair. How's it going out there? Facebook, YouTube, podcasters later on down the road if you're listening to this. Tonight, we're doing a special episode that's really oriented towards small batch or micro roasters like that's on my website. We've got Emily from Novus Coffee Imports coming back on to talk about roasting specifically for the home brewer, and maybe not the sophisticated home brewer. Maybe somebody that doesn't have a scale and 6 different ways to brew coffee. Maybe they've just got a grinder, or maybe they're buying ground coffee and putting it in a drip coffee maker. So we're going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking about quality control, what that means with green coffee, roasted coffee, finished goods, and what kind of controls that you should be thinking about implementing, and how those will help you get through these crazy times. So if you're tuning in out there or later on, thanks for watching. If you're not already one of my roasters, thanks for tuning in. Hit me up later after we get done with this at chris@roastersmarketplace.com. Thanks for tuning in, and we're going to kick this show off. Good evening, Emily. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for making time out of your busy refrigerator repair schedule.
I'd spend a lot of time repairing toys these days.
It happens. We do.
Yes.
We do as well. This guy just came into the office a little bit earlier, and his battery is dead, so his flashlight doesn't work anymore. So Daddy has to fix it. Yes. So, all right, let's give everybody a few minutes to jump on. We've got 3 viewers already tonight, but let's go ahead and start. Just give a real quick, brief rundown about your history in coffee.
Sure. So I've worked in most different areas of coffee. I started on the retail side. I've done retail management, and I've done quality control for extremely large roasters. I've worked for a tech company that helped with production management software. And I have been a green buyer and head roaster. And now I work doing green sales for Novus Coffee Imports.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And tonight, let's get a little bit of rundown of what we're going to cover from your point of view. What are we going to talk about?
So I thought it would be really great to talk a little bit about quality control. And I'm going to try super hard to not geek out too much, because quality control is probably one of my favorite things in the entire world. I swoon over quality control for coffee, and I love systems, and I love kind of the systematic approach to quality control. In my time working with roasters, I would definitely say that I think a lot of roasters see quality control as something that either they'll put into place later on, or it's very segmented, maybe just to how they buy coffee. And then once they've purchased the coffee, sometimes it's difficult to find time to devote to quality control. Quality control is a huge time investment. It's not so much a monetary investment, but it's definitely a time investment for roasters. And I think that it's a great way to build up the foundation for your roasting business, and make your roastery a little bit more nimble on how to react to changes in customer preference and in customer demand, which is why I thought it might be something that would be really helpful to roasters today to talk about. One, some people might find that they have a little bit of time they can invest into that. and also hopefully it can help them to be nimble and make quick changes that can help to drive a new consumer section that they're experiencing.
Okay. I'm excited. The floor is yours. I'm going to see if I can get to where you're bigger than me on the screen.
Okay.
Or you do have some stuff that you're going to share, right?
I don't have anything on my computer to share. I was just going to kind of talk through it.
That's right.
By all means, if anybody has questions or wants some follow-up or has some follow-up questions, wants some additional help, definitely message in the chat if you have any questions. But also to feel free to email me, and I'm happy to follow up and provide additional information.
And Tim says, "Oh, please geek out."
Okay, great. So with quality control, let me give you a little background about what I did for quality control to kind of put some perspective on it. I worked as a green coffee quality control manager. So I did green coffee and what we call finished goods. The roaster that I worked for at our facility, we roasted about 15 million pounds of coffee every year. We operated 24/7, so 3 shifts and moving constantly, pretty quick pace. Had 5 roasters, like machines that were going in the facility. So we were going. I was in charge of managing anything that had to do with sensory quality. So not like the width of a seam on a bag or how airtight the bag was. What I was in charge of was anything that had to do with sensory. So the green coffee, in charge of how the roasts were tasting to make sure that they were meeting the specifications, and then a lot of really honestly like super fun quality program or projects that I did to look at how long does coffee last in a bag? What's the difference in freshness between if I do a nitrogen flush on a coffee versus if I don't? What's the difference in quality and shelf life if I go and grind the coffee right after it's roasted, or if I let it degas and then I grind the coffee? So all sorts of different projects. I wish I had some pictures. I don't have any pictures right now, but if you can kind of close your eyes, I'll paint a little picture of what the lab looked like that I worked in. We had a quality lab where I had a sample roaster, had some cupping tables. But one thing that I think was unique, and I can't say that I've ever gone into another lab and seen it set up this way, but we had a brewing device for every possible way you could brew, that a customer could brew coffee. So we had Fetco brewers because we had a customer who served their coffee on Fetco brewers. We had a K-cup machine that had, like the little fill the cup that you fill up yourself. We had like 4 or 5 different Mr. Coffee pots to brew coffee in. We had all of the manual brewers, AeroPress. Every time something new came out, we'd pick it up and have it in the lab. And it was all very purposeful. It was also that we could recreate any experience that a customer could have with the coffee. So part of my job was to manage green coffee quality. So this is the side of quality control that I see most often when I interact with roasters, is managing your green coffee quality. They do a sample, they cup it. When they make a buying decision, maybe they cup it again a little ways down the road to see how it's aging. And then I see another side, which is looking at finished goods. And a finished good would be it's your production quality, right? Like you've made a production roast. This is what's going to go out to the masses. So I definitely see roasters who do regular cuppings of their production roasts to make sure that everything is tasting the same way. I think one of the ones that I don't see that was actually really important for us is to do like at home quality control. So that means brewing it the way that your customer is going to brew it. And that's one of the things I think is an area of quality control that small roasters could like totally dive into right now and work on experiencing coffee the way kind of that customer who always came into your shop, they're trying out your coffee, but they are not like a hardcore coffee enthusiast. They're not doing a Chemex, they're not doing an AeroPress. They have a Mr. Coffee. They might even put cream into it. Like that's their coffee experience. So that's a side of quality control that I think could be really valuable for small roasters right now.
I'm already kicking myself because I don't ever use my coffee pot.
Yeah.
Like I've messed with it. Yeah.
I can't say that I've ever gone into, and I feel like I go into a lot of production spaces for roasters, and I've never seen a Mr. Coffee pot in a production space, right? And so this is one of the things that I think is a little bit challenging. Roasters are very accustomed to creating a roast, and I know some roasters will do an espresso roast and they'll do a filter roast, but often they've created recipes for Chemex because they might be doing a Chemex in their shop, or for a pour over because they're doing a V60 in their shop, or for a customer, or they've created something very particular for espresso, and those are super dialed in. They've got recipes developed. They feel very familiar with what that experience is, but maybe they have no idea what their coffee is going to taste like on a K-cup machine, on a Keurig, right? And that's a very common at-home brewing piece of equipment. Whether we love it or hate it, it's still very common. And you'll have a lot of customers who would like to be able to use your coffee on that, especially for a customer who like goes to your shop all the time because they don't want to make coffee, right? So you're going to have a lot of customers who actually are not jazzed about the coffee making process. That's not what they're in for. So how can we how can you make sure that your coffee is a great experience for that customer who does not like to brew coffee? So yeah, like, a Keurig, a Mr. Coffee, I think are actually really great little small investments to see how your coffee performs for all of that. And one thing that so even a blade grinder, if you were able to tell a customer how they can grind their coffee on a blade grinder and give them some reference, granted, it's not our preferred grinder that we might want to recommend, but it is definitely this sort of grinder that I know a lot of people have. I just had this conversation with a friend. She got a grinder, and she got some whole bean coffee from a local coffee roaster, and she was super excited, and she tried to make the coffee, and she said it was so watery. And I said, well, what did your coffee look like? So was it like raw sugar, like the size of raw sugar? Was it the size, like particles of kind of the size of salt? And she's like, oh no, it was like really big chunks. Like, well, right? Like And those are some of the questions, the kind of information seeking questions that we can use to help guide our customers. But it would be great, what if you could produce brewing guides for a Mr. Coffee pot and a spice grinder, right? Like in the little blade grinder.
Oh yeah, that I used up until 8
Yeah.
months ago.
Yep.
I had two of them actually. I had one that I would grind spices in, and one I would grind coffee in, because I don't want to mix my coriander and
Yep.
coffee. It just doesn't get that flavor out. So
Well, and that's like
no.
my in-laws use a spice grinder, and they love to brew coffee at home. And I'm not gonna judge them on how they brew it. They have their way of doing it. But I think a lot of people today have not brewed coffee, and we want to help them we want to guide them to a positive experience. And a couple things that we as the coffee industry should think about is, how do we make that coffee experience approachable for them at home? So how do you grind it with a blade grinder? How much do you put in for a Mr. Coffee pot, right? If anybody's ever tried to use the measurements that are on a little coffee pot, you know that when it says 4 cups, that's not 4 cups, right? Yeah. So
yeah, most people would never, if they haven't ever weighed their coffee pot or took an interest in it, they don't understand those aren't really cups on there, depending on the manufacturer, of course. And my Cuisinart or Cuisinaire, however you want to say it, that I have downstairs, I can't physically put enough coffee in the basket to make 12 cups at a 1 to 15 or a 1 to 16 ratio. It will overflow. I can't get enough coffee in it. And that kind of upset me when I figured that out.
Well, the other part of that is that there's a big difference between somebody who buys pre-ground coffee. When you buy pre-ground coffee off the shelf at a grocery store, that coffee is all degassed. It probably roasted 6 months ago. It's kind of lifeless. There's a real big difference between somebody who then gets fresh roasted coffee. It was roasted 24 hours to 2 days ago. They don't understand that the coffee needs to kind of sit and rest, right? So they want to put that into their coffee maker. They use their spice grinder to get it all ground. And they want to brew a big pot. Of course, that's super gassy coffee. It's bubbling and going all over the place. They don't understand why that coffee is turning out terribly. And this is kind of where doing some quality control can help you, is that having contact and following up with that customer. Hey, how is your coffee? And if they say, being able to dissect that and have answers for them. So if they say, oh, it's super watery, I don't know what I'm doing wrong, being able to go back and inquire, what kind of grinder did you use? What kind of coffee maker are you using? I see a lot of roasters who are also putting together really great little videos for Instagram or for social media to stay connected with their customers. So this would be a really great video series: how to grind coffee on a blade grinder, how to brew coffee in a conventional Mr. Coffee coffee pot, something like that. And I think that those are really good value added techniques that could be, or value added information for your customer. And it all kind of, like I said, comes back to quality control and thinking about what that customer experience is. Developing that sort of information, I think, could be really, really powerful right now and help to make your coffee experience really approachable for customers. Because a lot of customers who come into your cafe don't actually like brewing coffee. That's why they come into your cafe. And so they're struggling right now with how to recreate that and how to have that experience at home. So that's definitely something that I think could be really helpful
I'm going to chime in
Yeah.
on the internet side of that. So, if you are into, if you're watching and you do have some sort of program set up on your website to auto send emails when you've got an abandoned cart or a thank you, look into sending out emails 5 to 7 days after you know that they've got the coffee. So on my website, they're set up at 7 days. 7 days later, they'll get a follow up email saying, "Hey, how was your coffee?" Okay, you can use it as a sales technique, but you're mainly using it as that feedback of, "Hey, how was the coffee?" Because if they open it up and they engage with you, then it's a tremendous tool for you to get feedback on it, or to find that guy who didn't like the coffee. And then
Yeah.
you find that and you can solve that problem before it gets on Facebook or Google or something. Because if you're trying to solve that problem, customers would a lot rather
Yeah.
buy from you again.
And we used to on a fairly regular basis, we would get calls about the coffee. Somebody bought a bag of coffee at a grocery store and they didn't like it. There was some sort of problem with it. And not to discriminate, but I will say that 95% of those calls came from people in Florida. It was always Florida. I don't know why. It was just always Florida. So whenever somebody would call and make a complaint about the coffee, we would actually take a sample of that lot of coffee. So we would ask them, "Can you tell me when the roast date? What kind of coffee was it? When was the roast date?" And then we would look and see if we had anything like that, anything left of that coffee that we could use as a sample. And we'd ask them, "How did you brew it?" And we'd go through and actually do the whole process to try to figure out and recreate the situation that they experienced, so that we could see if there was some sort of problem with the coffee, if there was some sort of problem with, if it was pre-ground, did we maybe mess up the grind of the coffee? Was there something that we did that's influencing it? And we always would thank that customer for taking the time to give us that feedback by sending them a free bag of coffee. So that was just something that we always did. We wanted to replace the coffee, but also just to make sure that that they understood we appreciated the time and energy it takes to send that feedback. And I'll tell you, even we did 15 million pounds of coffee a year. Most of it sold at grocery stores. You might think, oh, you're going to deal with a lot of people who are just trying to get free coffee. And we didn't. Like, it was usually very nice people, very, very honest with their feedback. If they had a bad experience, sometimes it was just that they picked out the wrong coffee. They wanted something really dark and they picked out something really light, or vice versa. And that's also valuable feedback for us about how we are communicating about the coffee, right? So we can make changes in either our wording or how we are leading a person to select that coffee. So that was part of our quality control process, was to review any sort of customer complaints that came in, keeping track of them, logging any sort of problems or complaints, so that we could look for trends, which is why I know that Florida, for some reason, had all of the problems, trend.
We'll blame it on the humidity. We'll blame it on the humidity.
Yeah. Strange things happen in Florida, from my understanding. But I would encourage roasters to also look at implementing that in their quality program as well, is to keep it can be as simple as a spiral notebook of what the problems are, and when that coffee was roasted, where that coffee was sold from. Is it that you could find that you have a certain coffee that's being sold on the internet, and when people get it, they seem disappointed in the way that coffee tastes. Maybe it's because the tasting notes are not matching up to the at-home coffee experience, right? And so that one, it could be as simple as doing some quality checks at your roastery, brewing it on a typical coffee brewer, and adjusting some of the flavor notes, right? Because what you cup on the cupping table is going to be different from what somebody experiences when they go through and brew it at home. So, and the other thing I kind of wanted to mention with that is, after you brew all your coffees in a Mr. Coffee pot, you may realize that it is in your best interest to think about maybe changing your roast profile a little bit for one of your coffees, right? I think that right now, having an at-home blend that performs, it's almost designed to perform on a Mr. Coffee pot. There's some great ways you can adjust your roasting to help with that. Add a little bit more development onto the coffee so that the solubility is increased and you're able.
Hold on.
Oh, this is great.
I want that.
You don't want that. Sorry, everybody. Everybody, this is Charlie who's watching. She's in here. Go find your mama. Go find your mama.
I love it.
I don't want that.
You don't want the hat? Okay.
Yeah.
I just had to make sure she was clothed, and I turned around and she was on the other side of me, just looking up at me. I was like, okay.
Yeah.
She's getting on the show. We've got a question here, and that was a good spot to throw that in. Here, we got a break.
Oh. So is it okay? Is this the question here?
Yeah, that's the question.
Minimum order that Novus accepts. We're a full service importer, everything from a bag up to multiple containers. So I have lots of customers who buy small amounts at a time. And do we sell to Starbucks? That's an interesting question. A lot of people sell to Starbucks. I can't think of anything that we've sold recently to Starbucks, but also that's, I don't know.
Yeah, kind of
It's
weird
kind of
question. Interesting.
proprietary, I guess.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Back
Yeah.
to it.
So, let's see. Okay, I was just kind of mentioning ways you might think about modifying a roast and doing something special for people to brew at home that you specifically design for an at-home, automatic brewer. So something that might have a little bit more development on it, something that might have a little bit more easier solubility, so that an at-home brewer typically doesn't get to a high enough temperature. So you need things to be a little bit more soluble, which is why your customer might be getting a thin, watery cup of coffee out of their brewer, is that it's not getting to a high enough temperature. So thinking about how you can make adjustments for that. You might even think about offering a special grind on that coffee for individuals who don't have a grinder, and formulating that grind to a paper filter at home. And also it could be a good opportunity to explore a coffee at a different price point. So something that might be a lower price point and hit some of those more classic kind of cream and sugar tasting notes, something chocolatey and nutty, notes of vanilla tend to go over really well with the at-home sort of brewer. At-home brewers, if you put a coffee in that has a little bit brighter acidity and more complexity, oftentimes you mute out the complexity because the brewer doesn't get to a hot enough temperature, and you can end up, because of the temperature, also highlighting the acidity, which in the end can just taste like a very sharp, kind of sour, watery cup of coffee. So I
never enjoyed an Ethiopian until I started pour overs.
Right.
Not on my drip. I was like, this is weird. This doesn't taste right at all. It wasn't brewing it right. Now I love them.
Yeah. I am super spoiled. I have a very fancy coffee brewer, but I also have a very unfancy coffee brewer that I use for what I call my mom coffee, which is the first cup of coffee that I brew in the morning when I'm too tired to like weigh anything out or think about anything. And it's a $15 like single cup little Mr. Coffee brewer. So it's not a big expense to invest in something like that. And I would totally recommend it for roasters today. So you can experience what your customers are experiencing. Oh, awesome. Thanks, Matea.
That's cool. This is
Yeah.
awesome. We've got somebody watching from Italy right now.
Yeah, awesome. With the roastery in Milan. Say hi to Frankie Box of Donuts for me, who's one of your roasters over there. You know who I'm talking about. They're a great team of people over there.
What type? What's your fancy home brewer?
Oh, I have a Mocha Master.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want
so
one.
I put them like right next to each other, like the super high-end expensive brewer and the little baby mom coffee brewer. So yeah, it's great. But like I said, I mean, I think that that all roasters should be experiencing coffee today the way their customers are. And I think once you try your coffee in those ways, immediately it'll connect for you when a customer comes to you and tells you, oh, I brewed the coffee, but it's not strong and it's really sour. And you'll start to really have that connection because you're going to know from your own sensory experiences what some of the appropriate questions are and how to guide that customer to brewing a great cup of coffee, or even maybe suggesting a different coffee for that customer to try that will perform better on their home brewer.
I've got a couple
yeah
on the ones that we've had negative feedback before, where maybe somebody hasn't been into specialty coffee and they bought something that they weren't impressed with. I've got a couple go-tos that I just know this is a really, really good classic cup of coffee and it's going to brew. And I just make the order and send it to them. Here you go. Sorry.
Yeah.
You know,
I'll tell you a couple things that I've experienced in a very general sense from customers who are trying to explore new coffees and struggling at finding what they really like. They tend to not like acidity. And that's sometimes challenging because as a coffee roaster, we see our ability to harness acidity and use it to provide complexity into a coffee. That's something that we really look for. And so oftentimes we have coffees that have beautiful and dynamic complex acidities. Those do not come through on a home brewer the way that you might be able to capture that on a Chemex or on an AeroPress or something like that. So that's definitely one that a spot that can be challenging. They also, oftentimes a lot of people won't tell you that they're putting cream and sugar or a flavored creamer into their coffee, but they totally are. And so some of those complex flavors that we really enjoy, especially fruit forward flavors, can not jive real well with how they're preparing their coffee. I tend to direct people towards coffees that are heavy with notes of vanilla, cocoa, nuttiness. Pretty much if you go into a grocery store and you see something on the flavored creamer aisle, that's a great, like, those are flavors that people want to have or that they're associating with coffee. And if you have an at-home blend that captures some of those flavors, that can be great. So in that, it would be advantageous to point a customer towards something like a really nice, like Colombian Nerino that's very nutty and chocolatey, instead of maybe a Yirgacheffe or a really nuanced African coffee or a Kenyan coffee, right? Those might be coffees that just don't perform very well for an at-home coffee brewer. But I also feel like those are oftentimes the coffees that as a roaster we're most proud of, and we want to push them. We're promoting them a lot on web pages. And so the customer gets it because we've built up so much hype, and then it doesn't perform that way for them. And they feel really disappointed in their experience. And usually they've paid a premium to get those really fancy coffees when what they really want is probably like your basic house blend, something to a medium roast that they can, that matches their normal coffee experience. When they go into the cafe, grab a cup of drip, add some cream and sugar into it. Like that's what they're looking for.
I'm a cream and sugar guy first thing in the morning. That's my dad. That's my mom coffee. Is a pretty, pretty stout Colombian breakfast blend or something like that. And I just like it. It's my sweet tooth in the morning, but
I'm exactly the same way. And I really have fun with some of the flavors of creamer the flavored creamers that come out in the store. And so I usually have like a really weird one. Like right now I have cinnamon toast crunch creamer. And I love it. And that's what I put into my coffee.
Yeah.
So, I think that as a roaster, we need to inquire about what our customers are looking for, meet them without any judgment on how they want to experience their coffee, and help point them in the right direction so that they can have the coffee experience that they're looking for.
We're going to highlight some comments here that we've kind of skipped over here as we go through here. So this is my cousin. She says systems and processes are my cup of tea. I love to learn how people get into that profession. And then here's one of my best customers right here, Danny Martinez. Danny, your stuff shipped from 3 different roasters this morning. It's on its way. He says yes. Then Wilfredo, another one of my roasters, he's watching. He says hi from Utah. And then our Italian roasters says, in my experience, natural coffees are forgiving and deliver a good cup even with a lot of not advisable practices. This is why I suggest them often. Yeah, natural process.
The thing with natural process coffees, and actually this is great that this got brought up. The thing with natural process coffees is that they can be very divisive because they don't often taste like what a person has in their head for their coffee experience should be. It's kind of also the same reason that some people really don't like really acidic coffees. In their mind, they have a certain coffee experience that they want to have. And those natural process coffees, while sweet and delicious, can be so far away from what they are used to experiencing that they can be very divisive. When I work with a lot of roasters, I think newer roasters have a really nice appreciation of natural process coffees. I think that there's when I interact with a little bit of more old school roasters, there tends to be a really strong dislike of natural process.
You can say hatred. You can say hatred.
I used to one of the guys that I worked with when I did quality control, I would oftentimes like roast up coffee on the sample roaster and package it up and send it to him at home. Because he didn't work at the office, he worked remotely, and I would always like sneak natural process coffees in and not tell him, so I wouldn't label anything. So he'd like open it up and just be like, because he hated them, and I was like, they're so good. It's amazing. Like some of the more old school people, their experiences with natural process coffees come before a time when natural processing was done really well. So what they link up with natural process coffees is terrible fermented coffees. So it can be just really divisive. If somebody likes really fruity stuff, I would totally point, if they want sweet and fruity, I'd point them let them try a natural process coffee and let them know, hey, this is going to be really different, just so you know, like it's going to be really different. But otherwise, I tend to just point them in the direction of something that is a really common taste profile with chocolate, nuts, vanilla. People like that a lot. And then,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
oh, I was just gonna comment on the really great question about how to get into quality control, because I get that a lot, and quality control is super, super fun. If you are interested in food and beverages, doing quality control for those, I would definitely look into. So one route is that a lot of those people have experience with studying food sciences. And the reason being is that quality control is actually a lot of data analytics and taking really meticulous, like the sensory side is part of it, but a big part of it is your ability to be really meticulous in your process. I applied for a quality control position with a very prominent roaster when I had done the quality control for this large roaster for 2 years, and I was applying for another quality position with a very prominent, well-known micro roaster in the US that has multiple roasteries. So I guess not so much macro, I don't know, very specialty. And the first thing, like, I did great. I made it through all of the interview pieces. And the first question I got when I was with the owner was, tell me about your experience with Excel spreadsheets. So every time that I talk to somebody, especially a barista or somebody in coffee who would like to get into that side of things, I would encourage you very much to look at strengthening your ability with data analytics. There are some great programs that are free that are available through Microsoft on different on websites, and I'd encourage you to explore those while also building your sensory skills. I don't actually, maybe having a Q grader certification is a good thing for quality control, because you do need to be able to quantify your sensory experiences. So that's really good. But yeah, getting experience with that, being able to match your sensory experiences, quantify that, and communicate that through data is really important. So that would be my little piece of advice to anybody looking to get into quality control. But I loved it. I loved doing quality control. It was really fun.
When you're talking about what would you think a small roaster, what would an example quality control program look like for a small roaster?
For a small roaster, I think the first thing I would tell them is to start keeping track, keep notes of things, keep notes of how, when you cup production roasts, keep note of what is happening if you have something that's going wrong. When you get arrival samples, keep notes of what you're cupping for the coffees that you buy. Maybe even keep samples of from, if you get an offer sample and you cup it and you have a little bit left over, save that so that you can have that to compare later on with the coffee that you get. Those are little things that would happen in a quality control program that you can do to help strengthen it's really about accountability and being able to trace things, right? To kind of work backwards if there's a problem. So so definitely keeping track of what you're doing, keeping track of what you're tasting, that foundational piece that I mentioned just before of it having a sensory experience and then translating that into some sort of data and recording that. That's the basis of any quality control sort of program. I think it's really important to experience coffee the way that your end customer is going to be experiencing it. If your end customer is a cafe, experiencing coffee the way that cafe is going to experience it. If your end customer is in grocery, how is that common grocery customer going to be experiencing their coffee? Something like, and that may take a little bit of research to kind of find out and get that information of how people are experiencing that coffee. But I think being aware that your coffee tastes different in different experiences, brewed different ways, and that you want to, as best you can, understand that customer experience. But the foundation is definitely having a sensory experience, turning that into some sort of data and recording it so that you can look for trends, problems. If you're recording every time a customer complains about a coffee, maybe you'll start to see that it's it's the coffee that comes from the first roast of the day is not tasting the same as the coffee from the end roast. Or coffee, you got a new batch of Guatemala in, and now you're starting to get some complaints from any of the blends that have that Guatemala in them. So things like that. But you can't track it down and trace it and really get an idea of how broad it is unless you're recording it. I was always really pleased with the fact that when we did at the really large roaster, when we had all of that that coffee, when we were roasting 15 million pounds a year, we had maybe one complaint every 2 to 4 weeks is what we would receive, which to me felt really, really good. And we took the complaints really serious. And if you weren't really looking at the data, you could blow out of proportion the amount of complaints that we were having, right? Because for a portion of what my day was, when we would get a complaint, that could take up, solving that situation could take up a lot of mental energy from my day. But when I put it into perspective that we shipped out 15 million pounds of coffee and we only had maybe 25 pounds of those that we had any complaints on for a year.
Yeah.
That's pretty good. Yeah. So I think that having that data can really help to keep things in perspective and give you a more, man, it's so hard when we are so emotionally involved into our product, like with coffee. It's so hard to not feel really, really hurt when somebody complains about it. It's really, really difficult to not take it personally. We can feel so incredibly responsible that, oh my gosh, I messed up and this is really, really tragic and terrible. But I think that when you can look at the data for what's happening and how often problems are occurring, and then also to be able to track what your follow-up was, so you can look at that and say, I solved the problem. This is a repeat customer now. They're happy, and see the resolution. I feel like it's also a really good piece for an owner to help them get resolution and stay a little bit sane with all of this, because it can be really challenging when somebody tells you they don't like your coffee.
Yeah, if you can take a customer, so one of my other day jobs is customer service for a company, and if you can take a complaint and turn it into a lifetime customer because of the service that you gave them over that complaint, they're going to tell so many more people about it.
Yes.
Because instead of telling 10 people y'all did a bad job, they're going to tell 10 people that y'all did a bad job But this is what they did to go beyond, over and beyond what they had to fix the problem, and you're going to get really, really, really good customers out of it.
Yeah.
Most of them.
Yeah, and I again, I would just stress, like, if a customer comes to you with a complaint on their coffee, our policy was always to replace the coffee, and usually we throw in a little bit of something extra, but it's not just about replacing it because there was a problem with it, but really showing that customer that we value the time they took to contact us and help us to get the information so we could solve the problem. So making sure that it's directed at, that you kind of direct your energy towards that positive piece, that you're thankful for how they followed up and that you really value their feedback, so that you can make things better, and showing that you appreciate them, I think, is a really great way to turn that around on the customer service side, and help a person feel good about that situation.
We're going to throw another question from our friend across the pond here. What informations do you think should be reported on the bag? Score, notes, lot, dimensions, processing details, farmer's story.
Yeah, so I mean, I think every roaster's got a unique way that they communicate their coffee story to a customer. And I think the most important thing is to make sure that that story is relevant to the customer that you're serving, right? I just had some awesome coffee that I picked up from Relevant Coffee in Vancouver, and they have some special lots where the packaging is conveying the elevation, tasting notes, some of these really great different things. And then for some of their more, I guess I would say basic sort of coffees, things that are blends, the more approachable coffees for the at-home brewer. Those ones don't have an overwhelming amount of information on them, right? So they've made that coffee more approachable and helped to kind of set the scene for that customer. So I think it just all depends on who you're going to be serving your coffee up to, and trying to make that coffee best meet their expectations for their experience that they want to have.
These are all fantastic ideas. I'm taking notes this whole time. That's what I've been typing away on so far, and I'll share a couple of those. But what is the most important investment for time, money for a small roaster to make in a quality control program? What would you recommend?
Yeah. I think some of the most important investments for your time would be ensuring, definitely, cupping production roast, or trying the coffee as it's right before it's heading out the door, so you know what it's tasting like and you can feel good about that. I think that's fantastic. I think that it's really important to cup your coffee your green coffee as it's aging. So sample roast it every 3 months and make sure that you're keeping track of how that coffee is aging. I think that's probably one of the best investments you can make. And I think as far as like right now, picking up a Mr. Coffee Pot, picking up a blade grinder, and figuring out how to make your coffee taste good on those pieces of equipment, and communicating that to your customers. I think that's a really valuable use of your time and energy right now. And I think those are some of the main ones that I would recommend. The other thing that I think is really cool, and I don't know if many roasters have worked on this before, but doing a shelf life test. Set aside some of your coffee, some ground, some packaged, sealed, whole bean. To do this, you're going to want to set aside maybe 6 bags of a coffee, and each week, so you set them all aside at the same time, each week you're going to brew one of those bags, so that you can see what your coffee tastes like at 1 week on the shelf, at 2 weeks on the shelf, Maybe you've set aside 12. How long does your coffee last when it sits on a grocery store shelf? How long does your coffee last when it's ground? Because you will have customers who will come in and get it pre-ground. So knowing what the shelf life of your coffee is really important. I hear a lot of roasters talk about how long their coffee lasts without having ever done a shelf life test on their coffee. Or maybe they did some sort of experiment, but then they've changed their packaging. Those are all important things that influence the quality of the coffee. And it's great to feel confident that when you sell coffee to somebody and it was roasted on the first of the month, that you tell them, oh, this coffee it's gonna be wonderful for the next 8 weeks, right? Or whatever. So a shelf life test is a great way to a great investment of time right now. I think that's an awesome thing to try to discern and figure out for your customers, especially because some at-home coffee brewers have no concept of this, and so they go and pick up coffee. They get it ground. They order it ground. They're like, I'm gonna get 5 pounds of this. I'm like, okay, 5 pounds of pre-ground coffee. And then maybe they're experiencing something like a problem with it in 3 weeks, and you can really easily figure out how to solve that because you know what the shelf life of your coffee is. And maybe even if you saw an order come through for 5 pounds of ground coffee, maybe you'd even want to reach out to that customer and just double check that that's how they want their coffee. Would they rather it be in small packages so you can seal it and they can open one package for 1 week. The next week they can open another package. So at least you can preserve it a little longer rather than a big giant bag that gets opened and sits on a counter. But those are things that could be like red flags for you that customer might have a quality problem.
When this whole lockdown thing started, I ended up ordering 5 pounds from one of my roasters that my wife really likes. I was like, okay, I'll get this. I'll get 5 pounds from Doug, and I got it. And the first thing I did, I split that 5 pound bag up to about 1 pound bags and vacuum sealed them and stuck them away. And so now I don't have that big bag of just everything. And you open up one of those vacuum sealed bags, and it's just like it was 3 days old.
Yeah, and that is something that I actually think that's a great idea for somebody to sell a large quantity, even though and you, of course, you add in the cost because it's going to have additional packaging or a different sort of packaging cost. But a 5 pound bag, and you open it up, and it's got like 6 ounces of pre-ground coffee that are vacuum sealed, and you're just taking out your little bags of vacuum sealed coffee and opening one up every 2 days, to brew your coffee. That's the kind of thing that could be awesome for a roaster and awesome for a customer. It's not right for everybody, but for the customer who wants to have a nice coffee experience and really doesn't like the challenges that come with brewing their coffee at home, that could be something that's a real value added for them. Or even something that's dosed out to 4 ounces, that's going to be perfect for a 12 cup coffee maker. Maybe you weigh it out and you can tell them you're going to take your Mr. Coffee, you're going to fill it up to 10 cups with water, pour one of these packets in there, bam.
Yeah, I think one thing I would like to see on my website, and I wrote it down when we were talking, is actual, instead of scoop measurements that you would get in some places, but actual table. Hey, this is a tablespoon, and you would need 3 tablespoons of this coffee ground to make a 6 or 8 ounce cup instead of a cup. Have more precise measurements on your website or on your instructions or on your label than 2 scoops.
And also cup. Like what's relevant, because I was helping a friend, and what I told her is you want to take about a quarter of a cup of whole bean, right? Because it's different.
Mm-hmm.
If they're measuring out whole bean versus ground. Say quarter of a cup whole bean. For every spot on your brewer that is 2 cups, that little 2-cup mark, like that's a quarter, about a quarter of a cup. So in your grinder, yeah, I think that's about right. I don't know. I like my coffee strong, but and also then telling them how to make adjustments from there, right? Like if it's too strong, do a little bit less. If it's really weak, maybe grind your coffee a little bit more. And I was unfortunate that she had bought coffee locally from a local roaster, and they did not provide any sort of instructions for her about how to brew coffee at home. So it's really good. There are a lot of people who are doing this for the first time. So I'd really recommend you reach out to those first-time home coffee brewers and make it really approachable for them.
I'm just taking notes here.
Yeah.
Yeah, that can be. I'm already trying to think of how to fix this with technology on my website, and that's something I can go in and do on my response emails. Okay, you're a first-time customer. And this is, do you normally buy specialty coffee? Or, make it up to where it's even tagging somebody who's buying something ground.
Yeah.
And you can go in and say, hey, look, they get red flagged in the system, and you go in and say, hey, what are you planning on doing with that ground coffee you just got?
Yeah. The other one that I always mention to roasters, in case they haven't experienced it, is if you have a customer who says that they want dark roast coffee, typically that means that they're looking for something that's smooth, a little bit sweet, and has a very low acidity, as acidity is one of the things that is roasted out as you progress through the roast curve. So when you have somebody who says they want something that's dark roast, it doesn't necessarily mean they want something bitter and burnt. What they're probably looking for is something that's just very low acidity. So being able to direct them, right? You don't want them get them a Kenya. You want your dark roast person, even if you do mostly light roast, you send them over for a Peru or Sumatra or something very, very mellow and low acidity. It's another really common one that people experience, because the initial response is usually, oh, I don't do dark roast, rather than, hey, like, let's figure out what you like in coffee, and I'm going to find a coffee that has the things that you like in it.
All this is great information. Thank you. We're going to have volume 2 of this.
Anytime.
Down the road.
I don't have anything going on.
We're not going anywhere. No,
yeah.
we're actually coming off lockdown here in a couple days. So that's.
I don't think we're not getting very close over on the West Coast. No, not yet.
Awesome. Emily, you got any closing remarks for our viewers out there that have joined us tonight?
I do. If you are if you're watching live and you might be interested, I will be hosting a webinar tomorrow on sample roasting. It'll be at 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. You can email me at esmith@novuscoffee.com, and I would be happy to send you a link as well as some additional materials related to sample roasting. I'm going to be chatting with an amazing sample roaster who does it totally different than I do, and we'll have a little bit of lively discussion about how you should roast your samples. Oh, I think you're on mute.
There was screaming in the background. I said, are you going to be the lady or the cat in the discussion?
Probably the lady. I get really wound up about how samples should be roasted. And our director of coffee for Novus actually learned sample roasting from Alfred Pete himself. And Alfred Pete used to stand behind him and hit him on the head with a spoon when he didn't get the coffee the right color. So we just have I had nobody hitting me while I was sample roasting. So we've come up in very different sample roasting generations. But he buys the most beautiful and amazing coffees, and he sample roasts everything to second crack, and I don't understand how he can do it. So we have very different perspectives on it.
Mm-hmm.
But the point is, we should have a lively discussion about sample roasting and some sample roasting tips and tricks. And that'll be tomorrow, 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Email me for more information and be happy to send everybody out the invites to that.
Awesome. Thank you very much, everybody out there joining us tonight. I really appreciate it. And I don't have my calendar handy, but I do have Missy coming on next week from Thumb Roast Coffee in Michigan for her Meet the Roaster episode. And if you didn't listen to our interview with Matt from Single Malt Matters, I think it's Single Malt Matters, if I said the podcast right, on Monday, we had an awesome time talking about single malt whiskey.
Oh, nice.
A really cool conversation on that. So check out the other podcast. We'll have Emily, yours will post from 2 weeks ago, probably tomorrow on the podcast page. And then this will be available in about 2 weeks on the podcast as well. And everybody else out there tuning in, thanks for joining us tonight. Emily, I'll hit you in the green room after this. Thank you very much, everybody. Stay 6 feet back, wash your hands, drink good coffee. Have a great night. I'm trying to find my rollout music here. And we're just going to end it.
Okay.
Have a great night.